We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist, Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. It's Thursday, February 5th, 2026, coming to you live on rumble.com/amradpod and on YouTube at amradpod1. You can check us out over at X America News, or my own handle at RealSteveFriend. But as always, guys, if you're on the Twitter space, come on over to YouTube and Rumble. It's way more fun to stream it live and be a part of the chat. You can check us out also audio format, Spotify, iHeart, iTunes. And as always, a reminder, do all those things like follow, subscribe, give us a nice thumbs up, leave a comment. Anything you can do to help us is much appreciated. We're trying to expand out, radicalize as many Americans to some commonsensical way of thinking. And today is no different. Today, get ready, guys, in the words of Lego Batman, for some reading. We're going to be talking about the Department of Justice and its wanton failures across the board, calling it the Department of Jesters. We'll talk about yet another Chinese Communist Party biolab may have been discovered in Las Vegas, but they already should have known about it. Aren't you glad the adults are back in charge? An FBI sex trafficking win, not so much. Ed Martin is out at the Weaponization Working Group, and we will do an after-action review on all the wins we've seen there. And then the would-be Trump assassin from the Mar-a-Lago assassination. I mean, we have to delineate because there's just so many of them. He was just convicted, looking at some sentencing, and we'll have to weigh in on that one. So let's get after it. My buddy George Hill alerted me to this one. He was rage texting me some links to it and got me on the trail of a story out of Las Vegas where the FBI and the Las Vegas Metro Police got on another lab. So let's begin. This is a local story. Headline: FBI, Metro Police find more than 1,000 samples at alleged illegal biolab. Here's what we know so far. So Las Vegas Metro, FBI served the search warrant at a house over the weekend. Investigators recovered evidence of possible biological material, including refrigerators with vials containing unknown liquids, over 1,000 samples. Clark County records show that the home is owned by David Destiny Discovery, registered to a Chinese national. His name is Jia Beizhu, and you should remember that name the best you can again. Jia Beizhu, linked to an investigation into an alleged illegal biological laboratory in Reedley, California. They also wound up arresting another guy whose name is Ori Solomon. So Jia Beizhu and biolabs and Reedley, California got me thinking, because that sounded familiar to me. And this is a latest event, latest transpired over the weekend, Las Vegas. But Reedley, California, I mean, I got to dig way back into the memory archives on that one. So I did a little bit of recon, a little bit of research, because it did sound familiar, and I was right. So the Senate Judiciary set up a select committee looking at the Chinese Communist Party after an event in California. And they issued a report. It's a 42-page report. And unfortunately for you, or fortunately for you, I read it, and we will go into some of it just to kind of get you all up to speed to find out just how bad this colossal galactic failure was on the part of our federal government, particularly our Department of Justice. Now, this report goes into the background because in December 2022, the Reedley code enforcement wound up responding to this abandoned warehouse where they found a garden hose poking around the outside. I mean, I just got rung up from my homeowners association. As an aside, maybe that's why I'm a little bit extra fired up today. My homeowners association sent me a naughty note because we had a wreath hanging on our door, and they said that Christmas decorations have to go down, and it's been too long. Completely an oversight. But the code enforcement people in Reedley, California, were dispatched to this warehouse, which was presumed to be abandoned because there was a garden hose, and that's outside of code enforcement. So they're going to go there and get their revenue and write them a ticket, whoever is doing it. But this code enforcement officer was actually an investigator. So on top of just seeing the garden hose out there, writing the citation, moving on to the next offense, knocked on the door, said, "Hey, here I am. I'm a enforcement of the law for this municipality. I would like to see what's going on here," because it wasn't an abandoned place. There were individuals there. So the Senate wound up doing its own little deep dive, and here's the background. Officer Harper found a vast warehouse filled with laboratory equipment, manufacturing devices, and what appeared to be medical grade freezers. She observed several individuals who were identified themselves as PRC nationals wearing white lab coats of PRC, People's Republic of China. So, Chinese nationals wearing lab coats, glasses, masks, latex glove, working inside. She stepped further inside the warehouse, noticed that some of the freezers contained units had glass doors, thousands of vials of biological substances, many unlabeled, others labeled in a foreign language. Later, they determined that it was Ebola in some of these freezers. Over 1,000 laboratory mice were in crowded conditions. The lab had been bred to simulate human immune systems. Subsequent investigation revealed that the lab was operated by a wanted fugitive from Canada who was a PRC citizen. Let's see if this strikes you as a familiar name. Jia Bei Zhu, same dude. This was known to your federal government, both the executive branch and the legislative branch, Article 1, Article 2 powers, because they did an in-depth study and issued a report. Isn't everybody glad about that? Because strongly worded letters and all. What did the DOJ do, though? The Article 2 powers, because they are supposed to execute the law and investigate the evildoers, to protect the American people against fraud and force, the very few finite amount of responsibilities that we expect of our government, regardless of who's in charge, conservative or communists. Protect us against fraud and force. That is, after all, why we have a social compact. So I went over and dug into the archives from the Department of Justice, which was very excited to tell you about an arrest being made in this case, Central California biolab investigation, October 2023. So the lab came to their awareness in 2022. They sprung into action, but not too fast, right? We had to make sure we stretched it out into the next fiscal year, October, so we can get our credit for 2 fiscal years. And they claim that they made an arrest finally. And by that, they just grabbed the guy that the local Reed County guys had already gotten on a code enforcement matter. According to court documents, between December of 2020 and March 2023, this guy, Zhu, and others manufactured, imported, sold, distributed hundreds of thousands of vials. No. The Department of Justice, Department of Jesters, these galactic losers, this is what they were able to get them on. Fake COVID test kits. The test kits also for HIV, pregnancy, clinical urinalysis, and other conditions in the United States and China. They incorporated into companies. There's 2 different companies. So, it gets a little bit nerdy, it gets a little specific to these cases, guys. But they weren't jammed up on a biolab, which might or might not have had Ebola floating around inside there. No, they got them on the coronavirus kits, okay? Now, the way they were able to bring about this fraud and force, was incorporating 2 different businesses, 2 distinct acronyms, UMI and PBI. UMI stands for, what is it? Universal Meditech Incorporated, and PBI stands for Prestige Biotech Incorporated. So, specifics to the Department of Justice, which is bragging about arresting our bad guy here, who has now been rearrested in Las Vegas, according to the latest developments over the weekend. In November 2022, Fresno County officials notified UMI, one of those 2 incorporations, that they were going to inspect the facility to make sure that everything was up to code following a fire that occurred at the facility. FDA officials then received an email from UMI that said, hey, we are no longer operating. We actually sold our company over to PBI, the second fraudulent corporation. And it's a company that is formed in Las Vegas, Nevada. So, for a grand after action report here, in case you're having trouble following, the Department of Justice charged this Chinese Communist Party member, a known PRC national, People's Republic of China, for fake COVID test kits after a code enforcement officer responded to a green garden hose, just happenstance, and found a biolab, and all the DOJ was able to get them for were the fake test kits. And we found out that the FDA, another arm of enforcement from the executive branch of your federal government, Food and Drug Administration, they were aware that these COVID kits were being manufactured in California. And they said, hey, we're coming to look at it. You had a fire there. We want to make sure everything's up to speed. And then got an email, said, no, we're closed. Everything's good here. We're over in Las Vegas. Oh, Las Vegas, already on their radar for the last 4 years. They've allowed a biolab to operate. Nobody followed up on the location in Las Vegas. Nobody said, oh, Las Vegas, can you give us a specific location, this company that you wound up folding into, this PBI, this fraudulent corporation? No, it's probably all good here. Nobody. Another galactic failure by your Department of Justice, by your FDA, and it always goes back to coronavirus. And now, thanks to their incompetence, the Chinese Communist Party has been able to operate a biolab, a second biolab inside of our borders in a second location. Well done, everyone. Congratulations. But, that's a failure there. We can take heart in that. Cracking down on some sex trafficking in my neck of the woods out of the FBI Jacksonville office. So let's pivot over to the X account. We do entire shows about this on the American Radicals podcast. For those who are new to the AMRAD pod, welcome aboard. We sometimes like to do entire shows devoted to reading the press releases from the FBI and the Department of Justice. I only got one here, and this one hit me in the feels. I wanted to bring it up to connect it to today's show because of the timeline and because of the nature of the violation. It is kind of personal to me. So, from the FBI Jacksonville, at FBI Jacksonville, Florida man sentenced to 327 months in prison for sex trafficking 2 women in Daytona Beach, my stomping grounds. And there's an adjoining press release from the Middle District of Florida where they talk about 327 months in the pokey for this bad guy. And his name is Dion Richard Smith. Okay, let's dig into this one because there is more that meets the eye, particularly on the timeline. Dion Richard Smith, he used threats of physical violence to compel his 2 victims to engage in, and I will keep this family friendly, commercial sex. So he was a pimp who was violent with his hookers. In the Daytona Beach area, he recruited the women in 2021 and 2022. Hey, Daytona Beach resident agency of the FBI Jacksonville field office. Did you happen to have an agent working human trafficking, sex trafficking cases in that time span? Maybe you told that guy to focus on January 6th grandmothers because those matters were a local concern. Just if any sort of complaint comes in, just make sure that the local law enforcement agencies are handling that, Steve. Oh, Steve, that's right. It was me. And the reason that this is personal to me was because this case was never on my agenda. It was handled entirely by Daytona Beach. And on top of that, they didn't even handle this until recently. So I did a little bit of digging, as I like to do. and found out that this bad guy here, who he was really violent with these women. He, on top of just, kind of roughing them up, he wound up at one point firing a pistol and then taking the hot barrel and burning one of the women, and then pistol whipping another one when she left the hotel that he was using to pimp them out without his permission. So not a good dude. But he's not a good dude already, because on top of being a pimp who abused his hookers, which the Department of Justice and the FBI wants to make sure that you know about, he's also killed a man. So I went to my local news source, which is the Daytona News Journal, and saw this headline, which was from June of 2023. South Daytona man convicted in shooting and faces up to 30 years in prison. The same dude, Dion Richard Smith. June 6th, 2023, found guilty of attempted manslaughter using a firearm, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. He shot a man in the driveway of a home and killed him. Witness told police that the victim got into an argument, wound up getting shot twice, and the entire incident was captured on surveillance video. So this guy wound up getting rung up on local charges. And an adjoining piece for your awareness out of Yahoo News: Daytona Beach sentenced to 27 years for human trafficking. Back to our original, we have to close the loop on it. But I scrolled all the way down, guys, to the very bottom, and there's our picture of the guy. He looks like a really good, upstanding citizen with multiple face tattoos. If you happen to be listening to the audio format on iTunes, Spotify, Spotify, you can flip on the video at any point you want, guys. But it's worth it. We are about 16, 17 minutes into today's podcast. You can see this guy here with like lightning bolt tattoo, like he's Harry Potter, but also Charles Manson, because he's got looks like a swastika or something on his face. I just the best of us, guys. And he also said he was a member of the Bloods gang. But I scrolled all the way down and I saw something that was of great interest to me. Quote, the 27-year sentence, because the 327 months, that's what the Department of Justice likes to do. They met out punishment in months. Again, big numbers, 327, it's 27 years. Okay, so a little over a quarter century, this guy is supposed to go to prison. The 27-year sentence will be served concurrently. That means at the same time, not on top of, with 2 state prison sentences he is already serving. He's been in prison for 2 years for manslaughter in my state, the land of milk and honey, Florida, on state charges. And after the fact, the FBI Jacksonville office, Daytona Beach, saw fit to charge him with some sex trafficking cases. And you spent valuable resources and time that you paid for, America, to prosecute this guy, investigate him, prosecute him, make sure he was convicted and sentenced to 27 years, which he can serve at the same time that he was already serving for the manslaughter. Look, I don't want to be dismissive of the victims of the sex trafficking. I mean, I did work it. It is kind of important. But this guy was already in custody. He was already serving a prison sentence. If you want to tack on some sort of federal charge, okay, we can do that in an afternoon. But the hubris of these galactic losers at the Department of Justice to say, congratulations, America, and hope that nobody actually does the reading, Lego Batman style, let's do some reading, and finds out that there was no threat to the community while they were digging into his sex trafficking, because he'd already gone, because of actual police work and actual prosecutions by state attorneys in Volusia County, where I hail from, putting this guy in prison for manslaughter. But, we'll just take credit. You're welcome, America. Really well done. Aren't you glad you give $11 billion? Aren't you glad that you get up every single day and bust your butt working a job so that the government can take their healthy portion of it in the form of theft, I mean taxes, and then on top of that, inflate the currency so that those very few dollars that you have in your bank account become worth less and worth less until they become worthless through inflation. Aren't you glad that $11 billion goes to the FBI so that they can investigate guys who are already in prison for murder? Great. Thank you very much. On the topic, though, of Department of Jesters, let's talk about something else that is kind of personal to me: weaponization. That was the word. That was like the word of the year in 2024. That was like the word of the year in 2022 and 23 as well. We had a weaponization select committee over at the House Judiciary. Yours truly got the opportunity to testify in front of Jim Jordan. Never heard from them again. They did issue a very strongly worded letter and made sure to go on Hannity and fundraise off of that. And meanwhile, still sitting here in a non-restrictive waistband. So like I said, guys, it's kind of personal for me. But we did get an update from the New York Times and multiple sources out there. New York Times, at one point, a newspaper. We'll go to them. They are, after all, the newspaper of record. Headline reads: Justice Department sidelines Ed Martin as chief of weaponization group. Now, the New York Times is no fan of old Eagle Ed, which they make sure to throw out that he likes to be called Eagle Ed. It's his own self-anointed title. But I'm not going to cry too much for Eagle Ed, as we'll get to. From the piece from the New York Times, Mr. Martin, known by the self-bestowed moniker Eagle Ed, will retain his title as the department's pardon attorney, but he has been marginalized in his other role as the chief of the so-called Weaponization Working Group. It's like the so-called whistleblower moniker, because senior department officials saw him as ineffective in pursuing cases that Donald Trump, who's mean, orange, and literally Hitler in the eyes of the New York Times and their readership, he's already demanded to be acted upon immediately. So the way that this weaponization working group is characterized by the New York Times is that it basically existed to bring about going after those government gangsters who Kash Patel, director of the FBI, identified in his book. It was supposed to do more than that, though. And again, I did a little bit of the Lego Batman reading on this one and went to the Office of the Attorney General, who Pam Bondi issued a memorandum way back in the very early days, February 5th, 2025, 1 year ago to the day. This was a memorandum from Attorney General Bondi launching the Weaponization Working Group and kind of laying out what their goals and initiatives were. They're bullet pointed in this memorandum. If you scroll all the way down, you'll see where they are. And there they are on page 2. You had to read all the way to page 2 to find out what those were. It's kind of hard to see, so I'll make sure that we work our way through them. And then you, AMRADs, can issue a verdict, if you will. You'll be the jury of this trial to see how effective Ed Martin was in his leadership. He was ineffective, according to the New York Times, of putting Donald Trump's enemies in prison. All right, okay. But what were the actual initiatives laid out? Was it just go after the president's enemies, or was it something else? So it's kind of boring to look at. I'll take it down. We'll look off screen here and go through it. Number 1, Arctic frost, Jack Smith. So that's kind of personal to the president, but it's also kind of personal to like all of the elected Republicans, right? That was the case where we found out recently that they were doing, it was Josh Hawley and others have characterized it, Ted Cruz as well. They were tapping our phones. No, they weren't. Okay. They were getting trap and trace on your phones. It's completely different. They were subpoenaing your records and finding out who you were talking to, but not the actual content of those conversations. Okay, so let's be specific with what actually went on there. Not defending it, I'm just saying what happened. And the way that you get that is with a court order, because a judge signed off on it. Again, wholly inappropriate, but it was all legal. It was all in keeping with the Constitution and the law and the rules and regulations, the Attorney General Guidelines for Domestic Investigations, the AGG-DOM, and the Domestic Investigations Operations Guide, the DIOG, the Bible, if you will, for the FBI. It was extremely buttoned up, even with further guidance from the bagpipe Attorney General, Bill Barr. Everything buttoned up. Now, what's happened with Arctic frost other than transparency? That's the coded language that the Republicans, the MAGA Republicans, love to throw out there. That just means things we like. Well, we did get some document dumps and found out that they were looking at the phone records of the Lindsey Grahams of the world, who got uber excited about that and tried to write legislation to make sure that they could get $500,000 from the government for every offense. But you'll see here, this is the original document at the very top, the watermark, produced by FBI Director Kash Patel. Make sure that you know that. I'm surprised he didn't actually put the ninth director. That seems to be really important to Kash. Now, you'll see if you're watching us here, and again, if you're only listening, we're about 25 minutes into today's program. This is the original electronic communication that launched this Arctic frost investigation, and there are 6 redactions. Those are people who still work for the FBI and the Department of Justice. So their names were redacted. So I guess we didn't do a really good job getting rid of all those government gangsters, did we, over at the Weaponization Working Group? What was the next thing, the next bullet point that Attorney General Bondi laid out there? Again, it's going after some enemies of the president. So I guess New York Times is so far so good, accurate. Alvin Bragg and Letitia James. Letitia James, she's the Attorney General for the state of New York. They brought charges, or at least tried to, against her for a mortgage fraud. She lied on a mortgage slip to get, it wound up being like $18,000 for a second house. She said it was going to be not a second house, a primary residence that was not in the state of New York, and it was wound up being like a rental property. And the Department of Justice tried, at least, and we did get photographs of Eagle Ed wearing his Dick Tracy trench coat standing outside of a residence that was attributed to Letitia James. But outside of that, did we get anything from the BBC? Headline: Grand jury declines to charge Letitia James after first case dismissed. Because the first case was dismissed, the Attorney General, or the United States Attorney, was deemed to be improperly appointed by an activist judge, so they dismissed the charges. But on top of that, federal grand jury in Virginia declined to indict Attorney General Letitia James days after a judge dismissed the earlier case. Last month, the judge dismissed the federal case because it was improperly brought, and that was also against James Comey, another government gangster. So swing and a miss on that one. And Weaponization Working Group. Third bullet point, and I will quote it: the pursuit of improper investigative tactics and unethical prosecutions related to the events at or near the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021, as distinct from good faith actions brought by federal employees. So going after people who were beating up cops or what have you, versus going after grandmas walking inside the velvet rope. What, is it appropriate for the Department of Justice to investigate a Catholic school teacher who had suffered a stroke and was paralyzed on one side of her body because she went to the Capitol to go watch the president and then went home? Didn't actually go inside the Capitol, but an anonymous tip was received. So for 2 years, the Department of Justice investigated Christine Crowder, wife of a federal air marshal, who was actually sending his people, he was a supervisor, to surveil his own wife when she flew. Was that malicious? Was that an improper investigation? Who was held accountable for that? I mean, we know it happened, and I have the receipts. Headline from CBS Austin: Biden-era FBI trafficked Catholic teacher for 2 years on unsubstantiated January 6th allegation. It was completely unsubstantiated because it was based off a photograph of a woman waving the arm that Christine Crowder is incapable of waving. But the top-notch Keystone cops over at the FBI apparently couldn't ascertain that she was paralyzed in that arm with all the surveillance assets that were used. They couldn't determine that that was true. Crack investigators over at the FBI. But who was held accountable by the Weaponization Working Group there? I mean, that was an investigation that went up the chain. It was not just the BRIC agents. There was a supervisor of a squad who was signing off on it. There was also an assistant special agent in charge of the field office who would sign off on that, particularly because that's a special investigative matter, a sensitive investigative matter, as forgive me, SIM, a SIM, sensitive investigative matter. It's the wife of a federal air marshal. That's an insider threat issue. We're going to have to make sure this gets up and approved by the supervisor, the assistant special agent in charge, probably the special agent in charge, over to main justice and FBI headquarters. Lots of people are going to be involved in that. Who was held accountable? Well, I know one guy who was in that chain and wasn't held accountable. That's Chris Rea. Chris Rea, who's he? Oh, he's Dan Bongino's replacement as the co-deputy director of the FBI. He was the assistant special agent in charge of the Houston field office when they had this investigation going of Christine Crowder. And you can see that the Weaponization Working Group, headed by Eagle Ed Martin, did a great bang-up job of holding people accountable, because Chris Rea is now the second most powerful person in the FBI. It's just a department of jesters over there, isn't it? What about the next bullet point? Because we worked our way through. We're now not dealing necessarily with the enemies of Donald Trump. So New York Times, partial correction here. Let's see, January 23rd, 2023 memorandum in which FBI suggested that certain Catholic religious practices were affiliated with violent extremism. That's the Radical Traditional Catholic memo that said that people who like to go to the Latin Mass were RTCs. It's a fun acronym, Radical Traditional Catholics, who held really problematic beliefs, which made them prone to become radicalized extremists, racially motivated violent extremists, aka domestic terrorists. What were those beliefs, pray tell, that the FBI authored an intelligence memo detailing? Being pro-traditional marriage, being pro-life, being pro-Second Amendment, being pro-border sovereignty. That made you a potential domestic terrorist. Was anybody held accountable for that? Well, Christopher Wray had that really embarrassing exchange when he had a give and take with, again, there he is, Josh Hawley, talking about what sort of accountability was there. Well, we put a letter in their file. Well, I thought that was inappropriate. That wasn't nearly far enough, but we're so back, we're so based. We have a Department of Justice under the great leadership of Pam Bondi, an FBI under Kash Patel, the Weaponization Working Group, Eagle Ed's heading it, right? We're going to hold people accountable. Who was part of that approval chain? The special agent in charge for the FBI Richmond field office, where that memo originated. His name was Stanley Meter. Did he get fired? Did he get prosecuted? Was there a letter even put in his file? No. Actually, Stanley Meter, he got to retire in good standing. And now Stanley Meter has just been appointed by the communist governor for the state of Virginia. Governor-elect Spanberger appoints Stan Meter as Secretary of Public Safety and Homeland Security, the most powerful law enforcement person in the state of Virginia. Zero accountability. Would he have been able to attain that rank if he had some sort of black mark on his record? I mean, Spanberger's a communist. She probably would have appointed him anyway, but at least there would have been something there. But the Weaponization Working Group in 365 days just couldn't get around to it. I'm not done. Another bullet point from the memo that established the Weaponization Working Group from Pam Bondi 1 year ago today. Prior DOJ guidelines, policy memoranda, and practices concerning the investigation of parents of school children who expressed sincere good faith concerns at local government meetings. That was the FBI going after moms and dads who went to school boards and characterizing them as potential terrorists, using national security resources, in fact. Oh, that didn't happen. Yes, it did. I was told to go do it, and kind of brought that forward when my part of my lawful whistleblowing, my so-called whistleblowing, I guess you would characterize it if you read the New York Times, at one point a newspaper. But where was the accountability on that one? Now, I've got something, these pesky receipts, these things that Dan Bongino insists that we bring him. This is the memo, and I'll throw it up there. This is the first page, joint message from Criminal Investigative Division and Counterterrorism Division. Now, this is the memo saying we're going to basically create a hashtag in order to compartmentalize and categorize any sort of reporting or investigations that went on of moms and dads at school boards. It's kind of hard to see. It's a little bit nerdy, not really relevant. I'll go to page 2, to the most relevant thing here for our purposes today when we're talking about weaponization working group and accountability, transparency. And that is the very end of this memo, which is actually towards the upper half of the page. And who signed off on this? This was the acting deputy assistant director, Carlton Peoples. Carlton Peoples, another name worth knowing here. Carlton Peoples. He, after signing that letter that was authorizing national security resources to go after parents as terrorists, which Merrick Garland perjured himself about, did he get prosecuted by DOJ? No, he didn't. Carlton Peoples was made the special agent in charge of the FBI Birmingham field office. And then, towards the end of the Biden administration, actually into the Trump administration, if you follow the actual timeline on this one, Carlton Peoples decided that, I'm going to call it quits. I'm going to retire in good standing. Here it is. Here's the press release, March 14th, 2025. FBI Birmingham special agent in charge announces retirement. Carlton Peoples left in good standing. Oh, and you should know Carlton Peoples had a long, illustrious, decorated career at the FBI that began in 1998. So 27 years that you paid him a paycheck. And he joined in 1998 and then promoted 6 years later, as they all do, with relatively no experience that would qualify you to be in charge of anything. But he promoted and he transferred to the civil rights unit because that's what happens. Carlton Peoples is a black man, and it seems like one of the most racist things that happens in our government is that if you're black, they just put you in front of civil rights because the presumption is that you kind of look like the same tan as Martin Luther King, so you probably care about civil rights. Civil rights, the most egregious offenses would be the government going after a person for their First Amendment protected activity or trying to take away their gun rights. That's civil rights. But because the government wants to expand a self-licking ice cream cone to justify its existence, they continually pass laws that say, like, well, there was a robbery, but it was a white guy who robbed a black guy, so it was probably a hate crime or it was a civil rights crime. So we can get our fingers in that. No, that's just a crime. It's a local crime, but the FBI, like they do for sex trafficking cases of murderers who are already in prison, they like to make sure that they bolster what they did. Carlton Peoples, not held accountable by the Weaponization Working Group. Eagle Ed, gosh, you just swing and a miss yet again. I mean, do you get a hit? You're not even at the Mendoza line, Eagle Ed. Next one, I'm not done yet. This is a bullet point that says criminal prosecutions under the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act for nonviolent protest activity. That's going to be kind of a problem now, right? I mean, at least the leftist media is going to say that the likes of Don Lemon didn't do anything violent. He did break the FACE Act, though. The FACE Act doesn't require violence. So I don't know why the Weaponization Working Group would be looking at that. No, which they're not. But what they should be looking at is who prosecuted the likes of Mark Houck, who didn't do anything violent that was violating the FACE Act. He just pushed a guy away from his son. Or, better example, who went after Eva Edel, the 90-year-old concentration camp survivor who just prayed outside of an abortion clinic? Was anybody held to account on that? I mean, she got a pardon, thank God, but who was persecuting her inside the Department of Justice and the FBI? Any names there? Any scalps there, Eagle Ed? No, just swing and a miss again. Well, you get one more crack at it, one more at bat. We've gone into extra innings here on the American Radicals podcast. And this is it. Quote, the retaliatory targeting and in some instances, criminal prosecution of legitimate whistleblowers. Now, criminal prosecution, nothing really jumps out to me as far as prosecutions go, but I do know that some of my buddies had their cell phone records subpoenaed. Some of my buddies had their wives' cell phone records subpoenaed. And they definitely had their lives kind of ruined. So maybe we'll stop short of criminal prosecution, but retaliatory targeting. I told you it was kind of personal to me. So here's Eagle Ed talking about what he was going to do for those whistleblowers.
Well, I appreciate that. And I also appreciate you bringing up the whistleblowers because, Steve Friend, Garrett O'Boyle, those are two men who I am trying to fight
Yep,
for and bring back into the agencies because these are
I
great
know.
men.
That's
And
they are.
the people I'm talking to are telling me that there's been false information handed throughout the FBI about these men, and they're trying their very best to go after their character. And I know that Dan Bongino and Kash Patel, obviously the director and the deputy director, are friends and they're allies as well. So I do have faith that they will make things right on that front. These two men need to be brought back. These are the type of people who could help you purge the corruption from these agencies, and so they should be at the forefront of all of this. And
Yeah,
so I
look,
think it's crazy.
I met about this. I met on this yesterday. I one of my day three of my day four of my job. I met yesterday on this topic of the whistleblowers, and we're gonna fix it. And we're gonna fix it because these guys are patriots, and I can tell you that you mentioned Dan and Cash, that they're on our side. I mean, that there's things working through, and I guess I'll just say this. I have one speed, and my speed is fast, and so we'll get it worked out. And
Oh man, Ed, you worked really fast, didn't you? 365 days in. You were meeting on day three on that very matter, and I don't think I got a phone call or an email. I know Garrett didn't. Cash and Dan, they're on our side. I do have Cash's autograph on a letter that says that I am fired by the FBI. Thanks, Eagle Ed. Thanks, Weaponization Working Group, for your catastrophic failure. Just cry me a river. I guess we're not going to have that really robust organization over the Department of Justice that's meting out justice and doing the right thing and correcting the wrongs. Colossal failure across the board. Department of Jesters. Let's go to one more story here as we are closing out on the American Radicals podcast. And who remembers the second time somebody tried to kill Donald Trump? There was that guy, Ryan Routh, just kind of like a weird cat. Well, we got an update to his story from NPR. Headline reads Ryan Routh convicted of trying to assassinate Donald Trump to be sentenced. So he's guilty, waiting on sentencing. Last fall, jury convicted Ryan Routh, planned attempt on Trump's life. And this is what happened over at the golf club. Now, it was a 2.5 long trial. Ryan Routh tried to defend himself in it. And then after the verdict was read, he tried to kill himself with a penknife and stab himself in the jugular. So sounds like a really mentally stable guy there. But on the subject of how great our Department of Justice is doing, yeah, you got a conviction of a crazy person. We'll see what the sentence is. What about the failures along the way, though? The security failures attributable to that? That guy has a weird checkered past if you look into it at all. What are his connections? Apparently, in the prosecution, they were looking at his cell phone records and seeing where he was traveling. Okay, who was he meeting with? How did he know that the president was going to be playing golf that day? That was an unannounced trip from the president. According to reporting at the time, the president flew in late at night and then decided to play golf unexpectedly the next day. He could have gone to one course or to another. He just decided to go to that course. Ryan Routh clearly didn't just post up on that particular location for days on end because there's security sweeps. Were the security sweeps failing? Did they just not find up on them? Is there an operational security failure that happened over at Secret Service? Where is that information? That's the sort of stuff that should be turned over in an administration, a Department of Justice that's interested in transparency, right? But yet, we haven't gotten that at all. We haven't gotten anything out of this Department of Justice at all except nonsensical ramblings and ridiculous claims of successes. And they're saying, oh, we got a sex trafficker. We put him in prison for 27 years, even though he's already in prison. And by the way, the prison sentence that we got for him, he'll be served at the same time that manslaughter case that he's already in prison for. Great job, everybody. Weaponization Working Group, 0 for 7. Wow, that's just Hall of Fame numbers right there. We can't track down a biolab that we knew about for 3 years. This is a colossal, cataclysmic failure of a government agency. Anybody within the sound of my voice should just be royally insulted that 1 red cent is taken out of your pay to fund it. It's a joke. It's a Department of Jesters. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us today. But I hate to leave you on such a dour and dismal note. So I did find this one. This is just a fun palate cleanse to send you off. This might be the single craziest stunt that I have ever seen. Skydiving out of a hot air balloon into some self-made confetti. I don't know if you had that in your bingo card. Congratulations, you win at life. All right, guys, that'll do it for today on the American Radicals podcast. If you haven't already, do all those things: like, follow, subscribe. You can do that on rumble.com/amradpod, YouTube, amradpod1, Spotify, as always, trying to grow that out. Plan to be back with you tomorrow, noontime, Friday, guys, finally. Until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRad.